invention of the glass negative in 1851, photographers have been using cameras to capture light, mark time, and show viewers the world around them. I like to think of cameras as empathy makers. At its core, photography takes viewers into secret worlds, hidden spaces, and shows us a reality that's not our own. In many ways, this is what drew me to photography. It was a way to stop time and slow things down. As an introverted teenager, the camera offered me the perfect camouflage to be a silent observer of the world around me. It allowed me to step back and gave me license to be curious, ask questions, and stick a lens in the face of someone that I wanted to know more about. As I developed a deep love of photography, my time in the darkroom became precious. The darkroom was a space that glowed red. It was marked by the Smiths, Pearl Jam, and the acrid smell of photochemicals that defined many of my teen years. You can only imagine how thrilled I was to learn that I could go to college to study photography. As the youngest child of immigrant parents, I can only say that they were less than, well, thrilled. But off I went to study photography at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. New York is a captivating city. And I found myself determined to succeed in photography, not just because I loved it so much, but in part to prove my parents wrong. Grit, determination, and many amazing mentors along the way have made my success possible. My first job in journalism was at the Associated Press in New York in 1998. Since I was just out of college, I worked the morning desk. It was 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. The hours were difficult, the learning was immense. At that time, AP covered the globe with what felt like a bureau in every time zone. By scanning the wires, I was able to learn about the happenings in Chile, Chiapas, Congo, and Burma. Each dispatch felt special. I remember loving the feeling of being in the know, talking to photographers and writers about their images and distributing images to member newspapers and publishers as quickly as possible. At that time, we were still reaching many photographers by pagers and landlines. It was the late 90s after all. Now, sadly, mass shootings have become a story that newsrooms cover on a frequent basis. But on the afternoon of April 20th, 1999, when I was in the New York office, we as a nation and a newsroom had not seen a school shooting of this size. The tragic events of that afternoon were unfolding in Columbine, Colorado in real time, and we were watching them on 24-hour news networks like CNN. The internet was still in its infancy, so we were not thinking about providing images to online publishers. We were thinking about having photos for newspaper deadlines. So after we dispatched photographers to the scene, many of us huddled around many of us huddled around televisions to try and learn more about what was happening. Just to give you a timeline as to how breaking news worked in those days, we had to send photographers to the scene. They had to arrive, shoot several rolls of film, then they had to drive back to the office, process their film, of course, dry their film, which always took like another 5 or 10 minutes. Then they had to scan their images and send them back to the New York office for global distribution. If everything went exactly as planned, we were looking at several hours before we saw the first photos. At this time, there was no Twitter, so there were 3 ways to get additional information. One way was police scanners. These were a staple of every newsroom. Every newsroom was equipped with them, and we were using them to get additional information. The second was a phone call to the closest local bureau. This meant you find the office nearest a developing story, and you ask them what's new, what's happening, and that's how you learn more about it. The third was cable news. But technology has changed, along with the demands of both newsrooms and consumers. Technology has proven to be a game changer in how we navigate the world around us, from how we listen to music, to buy plane tickets, and consume journalism. So in 2009, shortly after President Obama took his first term in office, I was working at the New York Times, and we had a photographer covering one of President Obama's speeches from the East Room. Now, at that time, the photographer was able to mount his camera at a high point in the room and then use his mobile phone to both take and transmit photos while President Obama was delivering his opening remarks. Think about this. In just 10 years, we went from waiting hours to see the first photos to just minutes. President Obama was just wrapping up his opening remarks, and we were able to showcase an image on our homepage. Speed became everything. Digital publishing was in full swing, and Gutenberg would have been proud. In short, innovation has changed the game. We now expect and consume news in almost real time. At this time, newspaper staffs have also contracted. That means we're working faster with fewer people. There was a time when newsrooms report on every time zone imaginable. That's not the case anymore. Many newsrooms have contracted their areas of coverage. Increasingly, newsrooms like mine are making use of a network of trusted freelancers to extend areas of coverage, but there are times when news breaks and it takes us beyond the scope of our Rolodexes. And our guiding mission is no longer driven by print deadlines. Rather, Google rankings and the public expectation for immediate information. And while we're sending photographers to cover a press conference or another news event, photo editors have become part researcher, archivist, and fact checker. This system relies on newsroom sourcing and verifying photos from social media accounts. This has become normal. We, as digital publishers, have trained our audiences to expect photos and videos in almost real time. But in doing so, we are walking a tenuous tightrope, one where we are balancing speed and accuracy with every breaking news situation. Many newsrooms now rely on social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to round out breaking news coverage. But in doing so, there are many important questions to ask before we proceed. Thankfully, we now have organizations like First Draft News to help journalists authenticate and verify information. By asking many critical questions, journalists and newsrooms can avoid making the types of mistakes that have the potential to cause reputational damage. This past October, I attended a conference in New Orleans and heard Amy Webb speak. She delivered her Tech Trends in Journalism presentation. Now, if you've not heard of Amy Webb, I encourage you all to seek her out. She's a futurist, and she offers a great deal of insight into technology, as well as technology tools and how they're changing not just the world around us, but how we respond to technology. Well, during this year's Tech Trends, she introduced me to Michaela. So Michaela is a synthetic. And she has a very real 1.7 million followers on her Instagram account, as well as sponsorship deals with Prada and Calvin Klein. Additionally, she has just released an album on Spotify. She has friends, some real, some synthetics. She appears in photos with both. And then there's Blauko. Blauko is Michaela's less popular friend. He has 146,000 followers. When I saw these accounts, I was shocked. Newsrooms have created a system of best practices where we verify images before use. In part, we would look at the age of the account, the number of posts, and of course, the quality of the images. These accounts look real, and in many cases, the photos themselves raise no red flags. The accounts, after all, have been verified by Instagram. And while we have best practices, technology is catching up. Technology is competing against speed as newsrooms are recording the first draft of history. And so as I look at how far we've come in the last 20 years, I think it only makes sense to think about what might be possible in the next 10. We know the photographs that resonate with us do so because we felt something when we looked at them. Joy, sadness, happiness, in short, empathy. And the empathy that we feel when we look at these photos has been amplified, due in large part to the fact that there's a photographer seeing the world unfold in front of them, and they are making choices based on light, shadow, lenses, and moments. So as we look ahead and realize that many of us are living in cities that are making use of a network of surveillance cameras, in part to reduce crime, and many of us live in communities where we're utilizing doorbell cameras, we must acknowledge that much of our daily life is being recorded in one manner or another. And courtesy of the cloud, storage is not an issue. In theory, all of this data will offer the opportunity to cycle back and pull a still image from any moment that has occurred. Technology is now allowing us to collect countless hours of visual ephemera. Cameras and technology are no longer solely in the hands of trained artisans and photographers. Rather, we now all carry with us high-quality photo and video devices with us wherever we go. But if you can get a photo of almost any moment, what is lost without the photographer, the image maker, the person who goes in and finds the empathy and the humanity in the stories that they're telling, the person who would deepen a viewer's understanding as to what's unfolding in that moment? Choosing moments based on light, based on lenses, based on empathy. So we must ask ourselves, what would happen if photographers and the humanity are removed from the image-making process? Yes, we can have photos of anything in the future, but they would not resonate in the same way with readers. And I'd like to leave you with this question. Can you have iconic, award-winning photography without an empathetic person capturing that image? Thank you.